Hello, I think I'm live. Desiree, I know you're going to tell me if I am. So I'm going to wait a second for you to type in here. My name is Rachelle Garcia Seliga. I'm happy to be here with everyone today. I'm a certified professional midwife, and I wanted to come on here today to talk about thriving rather than just surviving in the postpartum period, and kind of reframe the conversation from perinatal mood disorders to perinatal wellness. Thank you for letting me know, Desiree. I've never done Facebook Live, so I had some technological difficulties, but now I'm here. It's going to take me a minute to settle. So yes, I wanted to come on here today to speak to this group specifically because this group is a group of perinatal mental health counselors and social workers. And I know that the focus in modern time tends to be on perinatal mood disorders. And the focus tends to be on that because that's what we're seeing. I mean, perinatal mood disorders are at epidemic levels, and we'll go on to discuss that in a little bit. But I wanted to frame the conversation today that perinatal mood disorders are a symptom and not the problem itself. Perinatal mood disorders are a symptom of lack of postpartum care, lack of support for mothers and families, and ultimately, perinatal mood disorders are a symptom of a culture that does not support life. So I'll say that again. Perinatal mood disorders are a symptom of a culture that does not support life, that is not life-sustaining. And when I say culture, I'm referring to the collective, okay? I'm referring to the collective, the mainstream, all that holds the structures in place that structure, the collective, is not life-supporting. And so we see epidemic levels of perinatal mood disorders. And so today, throughout the talk, I'm gonna go on to kind of substantiate that and to share the science behind that, really. So I hope everyone can hear okay. Is the sound okay, Desiree? Yes, it does not support physiology and biology, and that's exactly what I'm going to talk about today. Yes. And is this sound okay? Can someone just let me know? I'm going to think so. Okay. Okay, so here we go. I wanted to share a little bit about my background and where I'm coming from so that you know what brings me here today. So like I said in the beginning, I'm a certified professional midwife, which means I'm trained to attend births at home. I have been a midwife and working within the realms of holistic women's healthcare for 15 years now. I have a private holistic well woman care practice, and I am the creator of a training called INNATE Postpartum Care certification training. So it's a 4-day training I created for birth workers and healthcare professionals that tends to the physiology of the postpartum period, because what I know from my training as a midwife and what I know because of what exists in medical textbooks and through conversations with nurses and even doctors, so little is taught or understood, or so little information is even actually available on postpartum physiology. And if we don't understand what is happening in the physiology of women in the postpartum time, there is no way that we can optimally serve postpartum women. So I created this training for that purpose. It's a 4-day training. I start at the root of the female body and I work up through every major system in the body up to the head. And I explain what happens during pregnancy, labor, birth, and the postpartum time to our biology as women. And in the understanding of what happens to our biology, then we can understand how to properly tend to postpartum women. So I do that. I travel and teach, and I run a holistic well woman care practice here where we live in northern New Mexico. I do want to say that for the past 15 years, I also have had constant ongoing mentorship through my elders. And so my elders' support and guidance really shapes who I am today and has infused my understanding of our biology, our physiology with a spiritual understanding of life. Let's see where I want to go from there. So I guess I will start by saying that to contextualize this, oftentimes if you talk about the postpartum period in general with women, or in the healthcare provider world, in the world, people think that postpartum is synonymous with postpartum depression. And maybe for most of us here, we know that that's not true, but I want to say that from the beginning. The postpartum period is not synonymous with postpartum depression, is not synonymous with perinatal mood disorders, and is in fact a period of time. And that period of time is relative, really, in terms of how we can define that. I mean, we could say in one perspective that that period of time is the first 6 weeks after a baby is born. But then we can also say, well, actually, it's the first 3 months after a baby is born. Well, actually, it's the first year after the baby is born, because a baby, by its physiologic design, is completely dependent upon its mother for its survival. And I say mother, it could be parent, it could be father, however, but I say mother because as women, as mothers, we have a physiologic design that specifically attunes to our baby's design, which is different than how a father partner's body is, okay? So our babies are completely dependent upon our bodies as women for really the first 9 months to a year after birth. We can call that period of time exogestation. So when they're in our bodies, that's inner gestation. When they're outside of our bodies, that's exogestation. And it's exogestation because newborn babies actually can't even keep themselves warm until 5 to 9 months after birth. Newborn babies regulate their breathing, their heart rate, everything through our bodies. So then we could say the postpartum period is actually that first 9 months to a year after birth. Or we could go to say, well, actually postpartum 3 years after birth, right? Because children are completely dependent upon us until they're 3, really. And then there's this developmental separation occurs. But really, women are postpartum for life, if we're going to be real about it. So the postpartum period is defined in whatever way feels real and true to a woman in her experience, okay? The angle that I take in talking about postpartum, the postpartum period and postpartum care is like this. Postpartum traditions from throughout the entire world are virtually identical, okay? And it's been documented that there's over 200 postpartum traditions that are virtually the same. So to me, if anything's ever like documented, then there's much more than what is actually documented. So when I say virtually the same, I mean that there's the same basic care that's happening within these postpartum traditions, okay? And those basic premises of postpartum traditions throughout the world are an extended resting period after birth, which what I found is the minimum of 21 days, up to 60 days after birth. An extended resting period means the mother is lying in with her baby, and her job is to nurse her baby, bond with her baby. She takes care of her bathrooming needs, but she is lying in, and her community is cooking and cleaning for her, taking care of other children and tending to her home, okay? That's the first one. The second one is specific kind of foods to eat in the postpartum period. And the food prescription, we could say, is foods that are warm in temperature, warm in nature, meaning like warming spices, and easy to digest. Okay, and so again, the food's going to be different depending on the place and the culture, but it's always those elements, and I will say nutrient dense. The third precept in there is heating therapies, heat generating therapies that bring heat into a postpartum woman's body. And then the last one is body work. Okay, those are universal. It doesn't matter where the postpartum tradition is coming from, where the woman's coming from. You will always find those elements within a postpartum tradition, okay? And the reason that postpartum traditions are virtually identical around the world is because they are based in our physiologic needs as postpartum women. And by physiologic needs, what I mean is what is required for optimal recovery for that woman. And I don't just mean optimal recovery within that bit of time, but what is required for optimal recovery for her lifelong health. And why is her lifelong health relevant? Well, her lifelong health is relevant because if we put the right language to things, you know, a lot of what's missing in modern times is the appropriate narrative, the appropriate language to describe things. So if we put into context the right narrative, the right language for what is a mother doing, she's raising the next generation, okay? She's raising her child, and in that, she is contributing to the raising of the next generation. So the postpartum traditions are established to support a woman's full recovery, because a full recovery for a woman means that she's going to be able to optimally care for her child, her children, which is raising the next generation, which is who is going to caretake that people, who is going to caretake the earth for the time to come. And cultures have always been concerned with this. It doesn't matter where on the planet the culture is coming from. This is the continuation of life principle. This is tending to the future generations by starting with the mother, okay? Because what we know now, ancient people have always understood this, but what we know now, confirmed through modern science, is that a woman who is experiencing postpartum depression or any spectrum of the perinatal mood disorders, there is going to be adverse effects for her baby, for her children, and for her children really until they grow through adolescence and beyond. Okay, we know now that perinatal mood disorders affect infant mental health, children's mental health, and adolescent mental health and beyond. That's confirmed through science. And so the postpartum traditions since the beginning of time were working to caretake the well-being of the mother, because in the caretaking of the mother, it was the caretaking of the future generations, right? So let me think how I want to go from here. So if I had to say, like in a nutshell, what the postpartum traditions are doing, I mean, I do a 4-day class on this, right? So I can go on, but in a nutshell, what the postpartum traditions are all doing cross-culturally, okay, is safeguarding a woman's oxytocin supply, okay? Oxytocin, for those of you who may not be familiar with that word, oxytocin is sometimes called the hormone of love. Okay, oxytocin is the hormone that is released in our bodies if we hug someone close to our bodies. Oxytocin is the hormone that is released when we hold our babies close. Oxytocin facilitates breastfeeding, okay? Oxytocin is the hormone that is released when we're making love. Oxytocin is the hormone that is required for an optimal birth experience. Oxytocin makes the uterus contract, okay? And in an undisturbed birth space, and we'll get into that in a little bit, oxytocin facilitates the most easeful birth, the most easeful passage of mother and baby possible. And then oxytocin in the postpartum period facilitates postpartum healing, okay? So I'm gonna go through all those things that I named, the extended resting period, the heat therapies, why we eat certain kinds of food and body work, and keep tying it back into oxytocin, because if we do not have ample oxytocin in our bodies in the postpartum period, then what we experience as women is postpartum depression and perinatal mood disorders. And if we experience insufficient levels of oxytocin with our babies, we can actually not produce enough milk, not have the capability to breastfeed our babies. Okay, so I'm gonna weave back into that. And again, all of these things, all of the traditional ways, all of the safeguarding of that which supports oxytocin prevents postnatal depression, perinatal mood disorders. Okay, so I want, before I talk about those traditions more and how all those old ways actually support a woman's full recovery, I want to kind of contextualize the perinatal mood disorders that we're seeing and put that into context of the larger picture, okay? So the CDC reports that approximately 20% of women are experiencing perinatal mood disorders. But the CDC is only taking into account live births, and the CDC is only taking into account self-reporting women who are self-reporting their perinatal mood disorders. So it's not taking into account women who have experienced miscarriages. It's not taking into account those who have experienced abortions, those who have experienced stillbirths. And again, it's not taking into account all those women who are not reporting, right? So then we could safely say that that percentage is much higher than 20%. And if I had to create a number based upon my experience as a midwife, based upon my experience as a holistic woman care practitioner, as my experience as a mother, I could put that number up higher than 80%. I would say more than 80% of women are somewhere on that spectrum of perinatal mood disorders in their experience after becoming mothers in the United States, okay? So this, of course, is epidemic levels, because epidemic is anything that is disproportionately affecting a population of people, and clearly this is disproportionately affecting mothers. So we have epidemic levels of perinatal mood disorders. And so then as a culture, then we begin to normalize certain things. We begin to normalize, oh, well, she feels like that because she had a baby. So common does not mean normal, right? And we know that, I know that from my experience, because a lot of my training as a midwife was in Mexico. And in Mexico, in the midwives that I was working with, okay, bye, Barbara. I don't know, we can ask Desiree if she can make this public later. I think that'd be awesome. My experience working in Mexico with midwives is that I never witnessed or experienced anyone in that spectrum. Thank you, Desiree. I never witnessed or experienced anyone in that spectrum. Any of the mothers whose births I attended to there. I lived in Mexico for 7 years, off and on, working with midwives and then working on my own as a midwife. This is really a modern culture problem. So I want to go on talking about it, and when I'm talking about perinatal mood disorders, I am never in my intention or my focus am I talking about it as if it's a problem with the mother or even a problem with the family, because this is a collective problem. This is a huge problem, and it's going to take many different angles to tend to this. What we're needing is a cultural revival or a cultural revolution to actually tend to the roots of this problem that exists. So it's not like there's a quick fix kind of solution. But again, when I'm addressing this, I'm not saying that there's something wrong with mothers, and I'm not saying there's something wrong with families. I'm saying there is something seriously wrong that postpartum depression is informing us to as a collective, that something is seriously wrong with the way that our collective reality is, okay? So to me, I look at those epidemic levels as a huge warning signal that women are giving to us of being like, wake up, people, something's not working. And so in that problem, then we can start to find the solutions of what to do, okay? So what I want to say more about postpartum depression, to take it out of this context of just constantly treating perinatal mood disorders, okay, is that there have been enough studies done. Mia Scotland, who's a clinical psychologist in Europe, she has more than 20 years experience, and she has some great research actually about if women are experiencing postpartum depression, then most likely they experience antenatal depression, so depression during pregnancy. And if they experience antenatal depression during pregnancy, then most likely they were actually experiencing depression before pregnancy, okay? What we know now is that 1 in 4 women in the United States is on an antidepressant medication or an anti-anxiety medication or both. 25% of women in the United States are on antidepressant or anti-anxiety medication or both, okay? So it is not a surprising thing then that women would arrive in the postpartum period and dip into what we're gonna call depression or somewhere on the spectrum of perinatal mood disorders. Because if 25% of women are already in that state of being before they become mothers, then usually what happens is that when they become mothers, with the tremendous responsibility of caretaking another human life, which is again giving the correct narrative to what it is to have a baby. It's not like, oh, I just had a baby. No, you are responsible to caretake another human life and not just make sure that that baby stays alive, but make sure that that baby thrives, okay? And then you have this responsibility in modern times to take care of this human life without any support most of the time. There's no governmental support, okay? Most workplaces don't support maternal or paternal leave. There's no community support. Most of us are living in nuclear family setups where it's just us and our partner maybe in the house, or maybe it's a single mom. Anyways, whatever the reality is, babies that are being born at this time to women within this modern context, most of the time it is this huge responsibility with very little support. And so the way that I look at that is like, we could say that perinatal mood disorders or postpartum depression is simply the straw that breaks the camel's back, or the last straw, or whatever we want to say. It's like whatever we've been able to hold together, okay, and maintain as women. Well, that just gets shattered after you have a baby, because a baby's physiologic needs, which are 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, that is their biological mandate, okay? Newborns require 24 hours a day care, 7 days a week. And if we're living in a nuclear family setup, it is ridiculous to believe or to assume that it's something that just one woman can do alone, or one woman can do alone with her partner. It's completely unrealistic, because we've only been living in nuclear family setups for less than 100 years of human existence, okay? It doesn't work, because by the baby's biological mandate and what their needs are, they require multiple adults, okay? In the world of science, this is called alloparenting, okay? So we arrive in the postpartum period, and it's the straw that breaks the camel's back for that woman who was just holding it together anyways, leading up to there, okay? So that's one piece of it in regards to postpartum depression, perinatal mood disorders, okay? Then there's been studies that have primarily been coming out of Europe as well to show that men are actually now experiencing postpartum depression in the same rates that women are. And then the other part that we need to consider when we're looking at the rates of postpartum depression, perinatal mood disorders, is what is happening for women in their modern day birth experiences. Most women in modern time, I know, Desiree, it is, wow. Most women in modern time are experiencing their births as traumatic instead of experiencing their births as empowered or joyful or joyous. You know, 98 or 99% of births in the United States happen in hospitals. And I know this from my experience as a midwife. I know this from my experience working in the world of women's health. A lot of what happens within hospitals is nothing short of what we could call obstetrical violence, okay? Obstetrical violence, abuse of power, and that same abuse of power actually can happen with midwives as well. So when there is an abuse of power in someone's most vulnerable time, as in giving birth to new life, then we come out of those experiences of obstetrical violence. We come out of the, oh yeah, if I could just, I could share stories on that. So women are coming out of their experiences of birth traumatized. And actually women are coming out of their experiences of birth, if we're gonna like label things, with PTSD, okay? That's not normal, it is common, okay? So then it's kind of normalized, but it's not normal. So if someone pulls rank on you, okay, rank meaning they are abusing their power and using their power over you, which is clearly a rampant problem in modern culture in all aspects and shows up specifically in women's health. And we can go on a whole tangent in that one. But if someone is abusing power and pulling rank on you at one of your most vulnerable moments in life, but there's not, again, the narrative, there's not the language to be able to explain what you're feeling and who are you going to talk to about what you're feeling. And then there's so much focus of, well, your baby's healthy, right? Your baby's healthy, so you should be fine. And then there's kind of this cloud of confusion of like, well, I mean, it could even happen for a woman who has a vaginal unmedicated birth. She could still experience this because of how the play of powers works out in the birth, okay? So women are coming out of a lot of these experiences without the language, without the narrative to say what is going on. And they are going to feel depressed, okay? They are going to feel depressed or go further along that spectrum of perinatal mood disorders in terms of what their experience is, okay? So that's another piece. Then something else that we need to know is that Pitocin, which is synthetic oxytocin, okay, which is given in hospitals to induce labor, which induction of labor is happening in astronomical rates across this country. So oxytocin in its synthetic form, Pitocin, is given to induce labor. And it's also given routinely in many hospitals now as third stage management, which means before the birth of the placenta, the baby's born, waiting for the placenta, they're going to inject, or not inject, I'm sorry, give an IV to women with synthetic Pitocin. Well, any form of synthetic Pitocin that is introduced to our bodies as women interrupts our natural ability to make oxytocin, okay? And if there's any interruption in our ability to produce oxytocin, this lends itself to create the foundation for postpartum depression, perinatal mood disorders, okay? There's been studies to support this, studies to support synthetic oxytocin, Pitocin, laying the groundwork, laying the foundation for postpartum depression. Okay, so these are just some of the things for us to take into account, okay, as we're considering the epidemic levels of postpartum depression that we're seeing, really. I'm gonna check my notes because I wanna make sure I keep me on track. Okay, so yeah, I wanted to get into that because I wanted to just say that it is way higher than 20% of women who are experiencing perinatal mood disorders, and it is depression and anxiety in modern culture and modern people, and specifically women, is astronomical, and that would be a whole other conversation as to why that is. 25% of women are on anti-depression medication or anti-anxiety medication, or both. 25% of women. So it is, we can expect then to see in the postpartum time that there's going to be what we're going to call postpartum depression, because it's so intense, the postpartum period. And we're going to say men are experiencing postpartum depression often as often as women in many cases, okay? We're going to say that the interventions, I should say, in natural physiologic birth, okay? Interruption in physiologic birth is the mainstay in any hospital birth and even many home births, okay? Physiologic births mean that there is the cascade of hormones that happens in our body can happen without the intervention of care providers and machines and measuring and monitoring, and without the neocortex being turned on, okay? When our neocortex can stay off when we're in labor and birth, the neocortex being the logical, rational mind, then our body can do what it's designed to do and birth in the most easeful way, okay? But births, modern births, are absolutely interrupted. So we have that, which is going to produce postpartum depression, and then we have routine use of Pitocin in the hospitals, which lays the foundation for postpartum depression. So I name all of those things because those are just a few things that substantiate what I'm about to say. And what I'm about to say, let me drink some water, is that The problem is in the culture and not in the body of women. Postpartum depression, probably 5% of the time, perinatal mood disorders, probably 5% of the time, is a true hormonal imbalance, a true biological, whatever word you want to give it, in women's bodies. 5%, 90 to 95% of the time, perinatal mood disorders are a symptom of a culture that is not life supporting. Okay, the problem is not in women's bodies. The problem is in the collective. The problem is in lack of support for women and families. And that problem lies in lack of support for life. Okay, so now that we said that, we're gonna move forward. Does anyone have any questions up to here? And I see there's 5 of you here. Okay, well, if you do, you can type them. Okay, so, I do want to say a couple more things. I'm sorry, before I move on. Thanks, Desiree. I want to say a couple more things before I move on that I have to say about what contributes to postpartum depression, because they're all things that are such basic things and totally go overlooked, okay? And the first is lack of sleep creates depression, okay? It's not that depression creates lack of sleep. Lack of sleep creates depression. When we are tending to a newborn baby, we are absolutely getting into sleep deprivation. Sleep deprivation is used as torture, okay, in places around the world. And I'm not saying that as like a joke, even though it sounds funny. What makes it a culture of non-support to mothers and families? There's no paid maternal, paternal leave. There's the 40-hour work week. A 40-hour work week, let's say that even if the mother can stay home with her baby, which in most times is not the case for people, because what's required to make ends meet is one parent or both parents working full-time. That's not supportive to the physiology of what we need as humans, okay? Like the way that bonding and attachment happens is through presence. So first it's mother and baby, and it has to be physical contact for it to happen. But if we're going to talk about fathers or partners supporting the family as well, the way that a father becomes attached biologically to his family is through the father, the partner's presence, okay? Because when the father, the partner is present with his baby after the birth, I'm going to say his now because I'm specifically talking about men's biology. It would be the same for women, okay, but different, but I want to talk about men's. Men's biology only gets altered after the birth of the baby and only after he has had contact, ongoing contact with his baby. And what happens in his body is that his prolactin as a hormone actually increases. And what that makes him want to do is to take care of his family. And then what happens in prolonged periods of contact for the father as a man, his oxytocin is going to actually increase. And when that happens, his testosterone is going to decrease. And when a man's testosterone decreases, it makes him be interested in his partner, in his woman, in his baby in a non-sexual way, okay? So what it does is it creates intact family systems. When there is a separation of the family system because there's no paid maternal, paternal leave, as an example, and the dad or the partner or then even the mom has to go really soon after the birth, 6 weeks is ridiculously soon after birth for a mother to return back to work. Insane. And that's the reality. I totally get that that's the reality we're dealing with. So I'm not dissing on anyone who has that reality or anything like that. I'm just saying that that's the reality as it is. And that is contrary to what our biological needs are as humans in order to form bonding and attachment relationships as a family, okay? So it's destructive to the family system, the separation that has to happen. Yeah, the US is ranked 46, I believe, amongst other countries when it comes to maternity leave. Yeah, it is. The US is the only industrialized country, whatever, first world industrialized, that does not offer paid maternal leave, okay? So yeah, what makes it a culture of non-support to mothers and families? That's how I would say it. I could go on that too. I'll leave it at that for now. Okay, so lack of sleep creates depression, okay? There is a definite lack of sleep happening by our physiologic design, by newborn babies' needs to feed. Newborn babies' stomach is about this big, and they do need to nurse around the clock. I know there's all kinds of ideas about schedules and blah, 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 but if we get away from the schedules and we look at what the biological mandate is, what the biological design says, what our biology says, babies need to eat all the time. And so that means sleep deprivation for mom, okay? Depression is also caused by dietary reasons, something that is not talked about, and it's such a basic thing in regards to our health, and especially as women, is that babies' brains grow in utero through, I like to use this language because again, it paints the picture really clearly, but babies' brains grow in utero through sucking our brain, okay? Babies' brains grow through omega-3s, which is EPA and DHA, and it is formed through the EPA and DHA of our brains while they're growing in utero, okay? And then when babies are born, and if we're breastfeeding, their brains continue to grow through primarily EPA and DHA, which continues to come from our brains as women. So if we don't put back in the omega-3s, that's a whole conversation. I talk about this a lot in my class, but if we do not put omega-3s back into our bodies after growing a child inside of our body first and then continuing to grow that child through our breast milk, our brains are literally being siphoned off. And the first thing that is going to look like in the postpartum time is postpartum depression. That will show up as postpartum depression. That will show up in the spectrum of perinatal mood disorders. And there's like a million studies you can look at out there to substantiate that. And then what we're seeing then in the long term with lack of omega-3s in our diet, which Americans are seriously deprived of omega-3s. I know it sounds all like fancy and complicated, but it's not. Like I can break it down pretty simply. But what happens in our elder years, if we're insufficient in omega-3s, what we see in the elder population, and again, we begin to normalize this because it's common, but it's not normal, is lack of omega-3s in the long term, specifically lack of omega-3s and cholesterol, good cholesterol, I would say, shows up when we pass through menopause as dementia and as a decline in cognitive capabilities, okay? We do not have to decline in cognitive capabilities when we grow older if we have the proper input of food, really, food and nourishment and oxytocin. Anyways, so I wanted to name those couple things, okay? Let me see where I wanted to go next. I want to go, okay, yeah. 5, 6, I have my papers numbered here. Okay, so again, in the postpartum time, we are working to protect a woman's oxytocin supply, because this is how women thrive and don't just survive. And again, when I'm saying thrive and not just survive, that's really not just a catchphrase. Thriving, I'm talking about when all of the biological systems are working to their optimal capacity. And what we are seeing for the majority of postpartum women is survival, okay? And survival, I literally mean that on a hormonal level, because most postpartum women are getting into stress response because of the demands of taking care of a newborn baby, because of lack of good quality food, because of lack of support, because of overwhelm, because how are the bills going to get paid, and da-da-da-da-da-da. So most postpartum women, and again, this conversation could go way broader than where I'm taking it, but for the sake of this conversation, I'm focusing on the postpartum period. And so most women are getting into the stress response in the postpartum time, which is the cortisol response. And what cortisol does in our body is that it inhibits healing, okay? When we are putting out excessive cortisol in our body, it inhibits our healing in the postpartum time, and it actually begins to steal are hormones that are required for healthy and full recovery, okay? So we need oxytocin in the postpartum time for physical recovery, emotional recovery, mental recovery, and spiritual recovery, because our biology is informing our spirituality, right? So again, oxytocin is going to facilitate healing in the postpartum time, and how that's going to look, as an example, is that's going to look as a shorter period of bleeding in the postpartum time, as an example. A lot of times now we think it's normal to bleed for 6 weeks after birth. 6 weeks is a very long time to be bleeding after having a baby. Like within 2 weeks, if a woman is resting and well nourished and receiving adequate support, her bleeding will taper off. We want blood and bleeding to happen in the postpartum time. It's cleaning out our uterus. It's a very good thing. But when we're seeing these 6 weeks bleeding postpartum, 7 weeks, 8 weeks, it's not normal. This is because the body doesn't have the energy to heal itself, okay? And again, in the stress response, cortisol is going to inhibit healing in the postpartum. When our physical needs are met in the postpartum time, which would look like appropriate food, appropriate support, appropriate rest, then it's going to helpfully impact our hormonal system, our nervous system, and our neurological system, meaning that physical health in the postpartum time, and always really, but keeping this within the postpartum period, but physical health is going to create emotional health, okay? And likewise, when our emotional needs are tended to in the postpartum time, so it's love and support and nourishment and acknowledgement, because a birth, however a birth unfolded for a woman and her baby, a woman's going to remember that for the rest of her life. And it is one of the most tremendous undertakings that she will ever experience. And what's not happening in modern culture is an acknowledgement of that which she has experienced and that which she is now, because a woman is not the same after giving birth, not physiologically, not spiritually, not anything. She's completely restructured. So when a woman is acknowledged and honored in the postpartum time, when she's loved, when she's praised, when she feels safe, that's the baseline, when she feels safe, this positively affects our cardiovascular systems and our immune systems, okay? So meaning that tending to the emotional health creates physical health. This is something that we kind of intuitively know as women, especially, and as people, that it's the mind-body connection. It's that there's this correlation between the emotional health and well-being and the physical health and well-being, and then the physical health and well-being and the emotional health and well-being. But the science that explains that now is called Psychoneuroimmunology, okay? And it explains exactly what I just said, that when we tend to the emotional body, we're tending to the physical and creating the physical healing. And when we tend to the physical body, we're tending to the emotional body and creating an emotional healing, okay? So it's like this. You can't separate that really ever as humans for a true healing to happen, but especially not in the postpartum time. So I wanted to just go through now these those commonalities behind all the world's postpartum traditions, so that you all can explain a little bit how they are all going to support a woman's healing and a woman's oxytocin supply, and how all of the old ways of postpartum care was going to prevent postpartum depression. And before I do that, does anyone want to ask anything or say anything? Facebook Live is a very interesting thing. Okay, so I'm going to go on. You can just ask questions. Okay, so one of the commonalities behind all the world's postpartum traditions is rest, like I said in the beginning, and it's an extended resting period that lasts the minimum of 21 days to the maximum that I've learned of 60 days, okay? And it really is an extended resting period where the woman is with her baby, nursing, bonding. She's not cooking, she is not cleaning, she's not taking care of other people, she's not taking care of her own kids, because the community is doing that for her, okay? So I will say that everything that I'm about to talk about is contingent upon proper community support. We can't do any of these things on our own. You know, all of the sayings that say things like it takes a village to raise a child and like that, they're not just things that sound good. It's based upon our biological needs as humans to thrive and not just survive. We are stuck in survival mode as humans, and what we are wanting to do, we collectively, in terms of creating new life and well-being on this earth, is we're wanting to create a thriving human culture, okay? Thriving in that all of our biological systems are functioning optimally. So that's what all this is based upon. So extended resting period literally is a woman not having any responsibility other than tending to her baby so that there is healthy bonding and attachment formed, okay? So rest, this is how I'm gonna explain rest. There's a few ways, but this is the way I chose for now. We need to rest in the postpartum time because it facilitates our pelvic floor healing. It facilitates our uterine ligament healing, our pelvic ligament healing. And this is kind of like what I talk about all the time because I'm a midwife and this is what I do. I do uterine treatments, I do external work, I do intravaginal work. So this is my hormones affect every aspect of how we feel in life. So yes. Oh, what happened? Did something happen? Did I cut out, Desiree? Okay, well, can you still hear me? Can you still hear me? I don't even know, can you hear me? Because no one's responding. Can you hear me? Okay, thank you. Okay, so I'm gonna go back to pelvic ligaments. Okay, so everything's stretched out after birth, and the way that everything can go back, okay, thank you for letting me know that you can hear me. So the way the most basic, easy, affordable, accessible medicine, if you will, for a woman's body to heal after birth is rest, okay? Because when we're resting, it's giving our body the matter that it needs to be able to heal all of our overstretched connective tissue and overstretched ligaments. And the reason that we want the pelvic floor and the uterine ligaments to heal, thanks, Desiree, the reason we want everything to heal is because if a woman has improper rest in the postpartum period, then she's looking at things like pelvic organ prolapse, which is the uterus slipping out of her vagina, or her rectum prolapsing, or her bladder prolapsing. Okay, those are some basic things. We're looking at urinary incontinence and fecal incontinence. Okay, and this is from doing too much. It could be alone from doing too much in the postpartum time, especially if the birth was intervened with in any kind of way, and then a woman's not resting. We are looking at a whole host of possible pelvic floor dysfunction. And pelvic floor dysfunction could last a woman's whole life if it's not tended to. There are many, many, many things that can be done to tend to pelvic floor dysfunction. Okay, but I want to say that a woman peeing in her pants after birth, a woman pooping in her pants, as in fecal incontinence, any part of our pelvic organs that are going to be slipping out of our bodies, out of our vaginas, okay, is going to make a woman feel depressed. And that's probably not something she's going to speak with a mental health counselor about. She's probably not going to talk with a social worker. She may not even talk with her doctor or her midwife about that, because there's such a shame, a collective shame around our genitals as modern people because of the collective history that we have. But I can assure you that any woman who is experiencing pelvic floor problems is going to feel depressed because it will affect every aspect of her life. And again, I want to just plant that seed here that absolutely all pelvic floor disorders, dysfunctions can be tended to, okay? And you can like personal message me later if you have questions about that. So again, rest is facilitating her oxytocin supply to facilitate her body's healing so that the uterus can go back to a pre-pregnant size, so that the ligaments of the uterus can heal up, so that the connective tissue of the pelvic floor can heal up, because we're safeguarding women's bodies and health for life through an extended rested period, okay? The next piece I want to say that is a universal precept of all postpartum traditions and is required by our biology as women is body work. We need to receive body work in the postpartum time. It is not a luxury to receive body work. It's a necessity. And I understand that there's not always the resources for that. I understand the modern context, but our bodies need to receive body work in the postpartum period, and especially body work for our uteruses, for our pelvis, for our pelvic floor, okay? And one way that I can explain that is that our uterus needs to shrink down. It goes from being, about 4 ounces as a non-bleeding uterus, okay, when we're not pregnant, to 2 to 3 pounds, okay, by the time we're at the end of a pregnancy. And that 2 to 3 pound uterus needs to shrink back down to a 3 to 4 ounce uterus. And our uterus sits in between our rectum and our bladder as women. And if that uterus goes back down to, let's say, this position or this position because of inadequate resting after birth and because of lack of body care, body work, and all of that, then a malpositioned uterus can affect our urinary health, our bowel health, our reproductive health, our sexual health for life, really. So body work is required by our postpartum bodies. I mean, of course, we can get up and we can go on with life without all these things. And that's what we've been doing for several generations as women, but it's not what our biological mandate says. So when people say things like, oh yeah, well, my people would birth their babies and get back out working right afterwards. Sure, yeah, we can do that if we have to do that. That's a survival mechanism, okay? There are many generations of people that have had to do that for horrible reasons. But that is not what is best for women's lifelong health. And that's what we're talking about. How are we creating thriving women? Because thriving women means thriving families, communities, and planet, okay? So that's body work. So then we need heat after birth, okay? Because when we are pregnant, it's considered to be a hot state. We have 200 times the level of progesterone in our body. When we're pregnant, progesterone is what makes us feel hot, in part when we're pregnant. When we're in the postpartum period, we're in a cold state. I could go on and explain that, but I'm just gonna leave it like that. So we need to put heat back into our body after birth. Heat increases oxytocin. Oxytocin is going to facilitate our breastfeeding. Oxytocin is going to facilitate our body's healing. And then the last part that I want to say of the universal principles of postpartum care is food, okay? When we're pregnant, heightened levels of progesterone, like I just said, we have 200 times the level of progesterone in our body, slows down our digestive system, okay? So that by the end of our pregnancy, it takes food an additional 3 hours of transit time, meaning like if it normally takes us 12 hours to eat our food and then poop our food out, okay? Then it would be 15 hours. It's an additional 3 hours by the time we're done being pregnant of how long it takes food to move through our body. The physiologic purpose of this is nutrient absorption so that our bodies as pregnant women can get as much nutrients as we can out of the food, right? That's the purpose of it. And it continues to stay like this in the postpartum time. We have slow intestinal motility. Why am I talking about this? Because if we eat a hamburger right after birth, or if we eat someone's cheesy lasagna, okay, these things are unable to move through our body properly because we have a weakened digestive state. Why am I talking about this? Because oxytocin, as in warmth, as in body work, as in love, as in proper food being warm in temperature, warm in nature, easy to digest, actually will facilitate oxytocin production, and oxytocin production facilitates food moving easily through our body, okay? And again, with the food thing, we need nutrient-dense food to be able to heal our bodies after birth, and we need to have sufficient omega-3s to keep ourselves out of postpartum depression. So food is super important in the postpartum time. And again, I know I used to never talk about food as a midwife because I worked in a lot of different realities. I've worked in realities where women's postpartum meals was McDonald's right after birth because that's what was affordable and accessible. So I'm not dissing on anyone's food reality or food choices. I'm just saying that for optimal healing, we need a specific intake. Food as our first medicine, not just as a saying, but as a reality. So food also is essential for oxytocin production in the postpartum time and as a prevention to lifelong problems. If you talk to a lot of women about when did their digestive problems start as women, they'll say, oh, it started after I had my last baby. Oh, after my second baby was born. Oh, ever since then I've had irritable bowel syndrome. Ever since then I have felt constipated. Ever since then, whatever it is. And that's because our digestive state is weakened in the postpartum time, and like Ayurvedic medicine, the traditional medicine from India, will say things like the digestive fires need to be rekindled after birth. And so there's a really strict protocol of what women eat. And what digestive fires mean within modern context or allopathic language is things like hydrochloric acid and enzymes and beneficial bacteria. Okay, there was just a study I was reading that came out yesterday from Australia that was talking about women taking probiotics prenatally as being a preventative medicine to postpartum depression. And it's like, well, yes, of course, because what happens actually in birth is that our levels of beneficial bacteria in our bellies drop dramatically. And so we need to replace that, okay? And we know now through modern science that 90% of serotonin, the chemical that makes us feel good, is actually produced in our gut. It's actually produced in our intestines. And so I'm starting to fade. I was on a roll, now I'm fading. And so we need to eat proper food in the postpartum time in order for proper healing to happen. That is all I want to say today. I wanted to just put that all in the context again of perinatal mood disorders are a symptom of lack of postpartum care, and optimal postpartum care. These things that I'm talking about are what is required by our biology as women to thrive and not just survive in the postpartum period and beyond. And again, I always lay that within the context, within the framework of when women are healthy and thriving, then they're most able to well tend to their families, okay? And when families are healthy and thriving, then communities are healthy and thriving. And when communities are healthy and thriving, then we have this ripple effect, and that's how the whole planet can thrive. So we start by the nucleus of that family, which is the mother and baby, mother, baby, father, mother, baby, partner, okay? We start within that nucleus. And this is how we're tending to the health of the future generations, by tending to the health and well-being of postpartum women. So let me just see if there's anything else that I want to say. If you have any questions, you can feel free to PM me. My website is INNATE, INNATE Traditions, TRADITIONS.com. Like that. So you can go to my website, INNATEtraditions.com, and then there's a contact page there. You can friend me here on Facebook, PM me, again, INNATEtraditions.com. And I'm happy to answer any questions or hear any comments, receive any feedback. And yeah, may this work go out in a good way. And thank you all for doing what you do in your work and your lives and your families. So thank you for being here today, and thanks for listening to me. And I'll just stay here for a second and see if anyone wants to add anything. Have any questions? I'll say that I'm coming out to teach in Brooklyn, New York, December 1st through 4th. And that's the 4-day training that I do. It's INNATE Postpartum Care certification training where I talk about all these things, but like in much more depth. So I'm teaching in Brooklyn in December. I'm teaching in New Orleans in January, the end of January. And then I'll be teaching in LA and up by the Bay Area in California in March of next year. And then in Taos, New Mexico in May, where we live. Thanks for doing this. I only caught a bit of it, but it was great. Thank you, Bethany. Yeah. So thank you, everyone. Sending much love. Have a beautiful day.